When I was 21, I transferred to a college in San Francisco. I checked out a room for rent on Craigslist. It was in a really nice 2-bedroom apartment. It was cheap rent and close to campus, so it was the ideal spot. The girl who lived there was 29 and her name was Beth. She was tall and pretty big, wide, and she had this jet black hair and wore pale makeup. She seemed nice, although a little quiet, but she seemed to like me and agreed to let me move in. So far, so good. My first night there, we went out for pizza, and that's when I could tell that something was a little bit off with her. Throughout dinner, she kept telling me how I looked like Shia LaBeouf. I didn't know what to say, so I just shrugged it off with a thanks. I look nothing like Shia LaBeouf, so it just didn't make any sense to me. When we got back home, she asked if I wanted to see her room. I said no, so she took me to see it anyway. Her walls were covered in posters of Shia LaBeouf. She even had printed out photos of him all over her mirror. She owned all of his movies also. I didn't know what to make of it. Honestly, it was creepy. The whole night she had been saying I looked just like him, and now it's obvious to me that she's obsessed with the guy. So a few weeks passed and I never really saw her that much. We didn't spend any time together, really. She would come home from work and practically run to her room. She would spend the whole night in there. She had this creepy high-pitched giggle and I would hear her giggling through the walls all night. I wondered what the hell she could be possibly doing in there. Occasionally, she would come out and talk to me for about 2 minutes. She would always be slurring her words, so I suspected she was drinking a lot. Sometimes she wouldn't say anything. She would just stand in the hallway and watch me in the living room, just standing still, not saying a word. I would turn and see her and be surprised and say, "Hello, Beth," and then it would be this long, awkward pause, and she would give out this creepy, high-pitched giggle. It was very uncomfortable being around her. She gave me the chills. So one night I woke up at around 2 a.m. because I heard what sounded like the front door being unlocked. I came out of my bedroom and all of the lights were off. But I could still see Beth standing at the front door. She had her face against it, and she was turning the lock back and forth over and over again. And every time she turned the bolt, she mumbled my name. Max Barker, Max Barker, Max Barker. Seeing her standing in the dark and mumbling my name really freaked me out. And it doesn't help that she kinda looks like a bigger version of the girl from The Ring. I just quietly went back to my room, but as I did it, I walked backwards. I got in my room and I just tried to go to sleep. One night I was watching Gladiator and she stumbled out of her room and turned the living room light on, forcing me to pause the movie, which was annoying. She then asked me if I wanted to hear about her ex-boyfriend. It was an uneasy segue into this topic, but I just said sure and then awkwardly sat back and I listened to her. 10 minutes into her story, she was so riled up. She was screaming at the top of her lungs about their breakup. I was worried that the neighbors were going to call the cops. She wasn't listening to me when I asked her to just lower the volume. Amidst all of her screaming, one thing she said that freaked me out, she was in such a fit and yelled, "I'll slit his fucking throat." That was a big game changer for me. Suddenly, I had no idea what this girl was capable of. She was practically a stranger. Everything I had seen was becoming alarmingly disturbing. After a few more minutes, she told me thanks for listening and she started doing her giggle. I got out of there pretty fast and went to my room to go to sleep. I had a pretty unsettled feeling about being in this house with her. And what's worse is, there was no lock on my bedroom door. I pushed the edge of my dresser in front of it to act as a little barricade. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my dresser scraping against the floor. Beth was pushing my door open. I turned on my light, shouting at her to stop. The thing is, I could see her through the opening of the door. She was so drunk and had this insane look in her eyes. I pushed the door closed and yelled at her to go to bed. I could hear her walk back to her room, but I couldn't fall back asleep. The next morning, when I went out into the hallway, my heart dropped. I saw one of her steak knives was on the floor by the door. I got goosebumps all over my arms. All I could think about was her saying that she would slit this guy's throat. I confronted her about it, and she had said she didn't remember trying to push my door open. She said she didn't even remember telling me about her ex. At that point, I had enough. My lease was month to month, so I found a new spot and I moved out. About a month after I moved out, she contacted me. I was at the movies and my phone was off. When I got out, I turned my phone on, and to my shock, I received 40 plus text messages that she had sent me over the past 2 hours. They were all just insane texts that ranged from everything between "Hi, how are you" to "I fucking hate you." It was insane. I didn't respond and I never heard from her again. I always wonder if I hadn't set my dresser in front of my door, would she have quietly come into my room and slit my throat? It still freaks me out to this day.
Hello, my name is EJ Hunyadi. Follow me on TikTok at EJ Hunyadi. That's at EJHUNYADI on TikTok. Recently, my friends and I had a rather close call with a stray bullet. And when I say close, I mean inches close. Needless to say, it's not something we'd ever like to experience again. So about a month ago, my friends and I had tickets to a professional hockey game in Minneapolis. The game was about a 5-hour drive from where we lived, so we decided to make a weekend trip out of it. On that Friday afternoon, I was picked up by my friend Kevin. We then picked up my other friend Dan and hit the road. We weren't heading for a hotel, but instead to the house of a mutual friend, Jack. Jack lived in North Minneapolis, and he'd offered to let us stay to his house for the weekend. We'd all grown up with Jack, and were good friends with him, and he had tickets to the hockey game too. We figured staying at his place would make the weekend a lot more fun. Plus, it would save us money on a hotel. We arrived at Jack's house early in the evening, and Kevin parked the car on the street out front. He texted Jack to let him know we were there, and we got out and went to the back to get our bags. It was about at this time that we heard tires screeching, and we turned to look at the intersection directly behind us. A green compact car apparently cut off another car, a dark-colored SUV, as the driver was trying to proceed through the intersection. Both cars stopped, and the two male drivers had rolled down their windows and started to yell at each other. Not wanting to get involved, I quickly grabbed my bag and walked up the path to Jack's house, with Dan close behind me. The house that Jack lived in was sort of retrofitted as a duplex, where he rented one floor and someone else lived on the other floor. Jack had moved to the city pretty recently, and we'd never visited him there before. So when we entered the walk-in porch, Dan and I weren't sure which door was his. As we stood there, I pulled out my phone to call Jack and ask him to let us in. Kevin, meanwhile, was still at the back of his car rearranging some bags and trying to fix a panel that had popped loose during the drive. The two drivers were still yelling at each other, and at this point, they had both exited their vehicles. I didn't have a great view of the situation from the walk-in porch, but I could still hear them yelling. Jack's house was right on the corner, by the way, so we were only about 20 yards away from where this was going down. All of a sudden, we heard a loud pop. Dan and I froze, and I saw Kevin stand up from the back of his car and look around. I immediately thought it might be a gunshot, but I wasn't 100% sure. I turned to Dan, and from the look on his face, I saw that he thought it was a gunshot too. Okay, let's get the hell inside right now, Dan said to me nervously. I unfroze and quickly made the call to Jack, who said he was on his way to open the door. Meanwhile, we heard the two cars peel off, and Kevin joined us on the walk-in porch. We all agreed that it was a gunshot, and that it had come from one of the two drivers involved in the road rage incident. None of us had seen it directly, but clearly one of the drivers had fired a gun. We didn't know who shot or which direction the bullet went, and Kevin said that he didn't hear any bullets whizzing past. Jack led us into the house, commenting he heard the shot too, and swearing that nothing like that had happened since he moved there. We talked about it for a bit, but no one was hurt and the drivers were gone anyway, so we just shook it off. Following that, we had a great evening of eating, exploring, and getting drunk at the nail-biter of a hockey game. We didn't use Kevin's car for the rest of the weekend because Jack knew the area and offered to drive us everywhere. When we were ready to head home on Sunday afternoon, we piled back into Kevin's car. That's when we realized exactly where the bullet had gone. There was a clean bullet hole clean through Kevin's rearview mirror and windshield, with glass shards and bits of plastic scattered across his dashboard. Stunned, we looked around for an entrance hole in the back of the car, but we couldn't find one. That left only one possibility. That bullet came through the open hatch of Kevin's car while he was hunched down in the back trying to fix the panel. Based on the bullet's trajectory and Kevin's position at the time of the incident, there is no way he was more than a foot away from being hit. If he had been standing up, Kevin would have been shot in the head or neck and might be dead right now. The attached photo shows where the bullet went through the car's mirror and windshield. After that, well, I sincerely hope it went into a tree rather than one of the many houses in the area. Once the shock of our discovery wore off, we called the police to get a report for insurance purposes. An officer showed up, and Kevin showed her the bullet hole in his windshield. At first, she was confused about the lack of an entrance hole in the back. I think for a second she even suspected we were messing around and fired a gun from inside the car. But when Kevin told her the details, why the back was open and where he was standing, I saw the officer's jaw drop. Unfortunately, none of us could provide the officer with any truly useful information like a detailed description of the shooter or a license plate number. Once the officer left, our next issue was figuring out how the heck we were going to drive 5 hours home with a bullet hole through the windshield. Thankfully, a patch job of a sealer and duct tape from a local hardware store did the trick. On the drive home, we had a solemn conversation and a few hours of hard thinking about the fragility of human life. Even a month later, I'm not sure if I've fully processed how close Kevin came to being shot and possibly killed. I can't even imagine how he feels about it. It's crazy to think how different our lives would be right now if Kevin was just standing a few inches taller when that gun went off. As for the guy who thought it was a good idea to fire a gun in a neighborhood full of people and houses, I hope he either gets his life in order or ends up in jail before he hurts any innocent bystanders.
So I'm a female in my late 30s, and I'm a travel counselor for a large tour company. We're pretty well known, so I'm not going to be dropping any names for privacy's sake. That being said, what occurred here is 100% for real. And yes, I know everyone claims that on here, but you'll just have to take my word for it. So as a travel counselor, which is fancy for travel agent, I book many cruises. Both my company and many cruise lines offer us in the industry what's known as a fam trip to familiarize us with what the cruise line offers. So I was approached 2 weeks before the holidays with the chance to take such a trip on a 4-night cruise to the Baja Peninsula. It left the day after Christmas. Since my husband had a big guys trip with his best friends lined up, I thought perfect. My in-laws had been begging us to watch our 7-year-old daughter. So she went to grandma's and I went on a free cruise. What could go wrong? A little sand, surf, and sun. While it's winter, 66-degree days are much warmer than the teens and below zeros we have up north. The flight was perfect. The embarking went on as smooth as butter. The lovely balcony room I was put on was wonderful. So far, so good. That night, I'm at dinner, and an Indian man sits next to me. Now, this struck me as odd as there were several empty seats available. He strikes up conversation, introduces himself, and says he's traveling with his elderly parents, sister, and her family. He's 26, works in communication, and attends college in London. He seems nice. We have a lovely conversation, and I throw in there that I'm happily married and had a child. Finally, his family arrives to eat, and we part ways. I figure I'll never see him again. The next day I get off our port. I signed up for a Segway tour, and who do I see in line? My new friend and his father, and who I also assume is his oldest nephew. He of course waves at me, and we make simple chit-chat before starting our tour. After the tour, there was an opportunity to walk around. I chose to browse the shops and get some pizza. However, I felt like I was being watched or followed. I turned around a few times but didn't see anyone. I shrugged it off and went about my day. I go back to the ship and I change into my bathing suit, and I go lay out on the deck. It's a perfect 72-degree day, and my skin loved the vitamin D. I order a drink and I put in my wireless headphones. I'm dozing off when I feel hands roughly shake me. I jolt sitting straight up. It's my so-called friend. Although he's frowning, staring at me, disapproving. He angrily tells me I'm not allowed to show off my body, and then I'm disrespecting him and his religion by acting like a slut. By now, I have 2 cruise employees I'm friends with who hear the commotion and are telling him he needs to leave me alone. Never mind, I'm embarrassed at this point. I tell him I'm a married woman, and what I do isn't any of his concern. As he stumps off, he informs me that if I was his woman, I'd be sorry. I figure I won't have to deal with him, and the next day is perfect. No sign of him. We are at sea, and I hung out on my balcony sunning and dozing. That night, after a few martinis at the piano bar, I settled in my room for a night after talking with my hubby through Facebook Messenger. I'm about to doze off, but my door starts shaking. It sounds as if someone is violently running into my door. I throw a robe on and I look out my peephole. It's that Indian guy. And right now he looks crazy. It was formal night, so he's in formal wear. His hair was done, red face screaming profanities at me. Luckily the guy across the hall from me opens his door and he tells the creep to get the hell out of the hallway before his kids are waking up. The Indian guy gives one last profanity and then he leaves. The next morning, the guy across the hall tells me something terrifying. He swears that the guy had a steak knife in his hand. I informed the cruise director, but I'm not sure what happened after that. I only saw that guy one more time on the cruise. As we were disembarking, he was carrying one of his nieces and luckily he didn't see me. I always wondered what would have happened if that guy would have gotten in my room and why he was acting like that.
Nightmare Files.